welcome to the debut episode of the SINTVNOW podcast. Of course, the program where we focus on smart, intelligent news and Asian pop culture. And I am your lovely host. No, all crazy accents aside, guys, I am Amira Blaze. So, guys, I can't even believe that I even had a chance to talk to this intellectual man, and his name is Lakshman. He is an award-winning author and creator of the Mythborn book series. There are actually 5 books in all, guys, and I really, really recommend you check them out. It's just a very unique way of looking at beyond like fantasy and sci-fi, and just a beautiful ideology in regards to the book series. But besides that, in 1982, he ended up joining Bethesda Softworks as an executive producer and lead designer, and he had the opportunity, guys, to work on the creation of, this little series called the Elder Scrolls franchise, guys. And he even went on to work with games too, like Terminator and all this fabulous stuff this man has done. And guys, he is really a testament of, if you have tenacity and if you put your mind to whatever you want to accomplish in your life, you can make it happen. As a person of color as well, I really look up to him, because we know in the gaming industry that there are some people of color, but there's not many. And I was just really blessed to be able to talk to him. And even, to be honest with you guys, it even motivated me to keep moving forward and rising, to success someday, with the blessings above. But without further ado, guys, here is my exclusive interview with Lakshman. And I'm sure for you, growing up in a place like Bangkok, and, very diverse, different backgrounds, different experiences. How was that like growing up? Because I think a lot of times when I see Thailand, especially on TV, you see it's very lush, it's very beautiful. But how was it really like for you being there?
It's interesting. So my memories are very fond of that time, and they're mainly that way because I was very young. I got here to the States when I was under 10 years old. I think it might have been like 7 or 8. I can't remember now exactly. But so most of my memories in Bangkok were very, sort of young kinds of memories. Now, that said, I recall it being awesome. Life was different back then. And it's weird to say it that way, but I think parents are probably a little more confident in their kids' abilities and less worried about things like you being snatched. In Bangkok, at least where I grew up, the village is not the village in a literal sense, but the people around you are literally your family. Like, everyone you see on the road and in your neighborhood is an uncle, an aunt. We'll call them all uncles, aunties, just like in India. I don't know what your background is, but mine is Indian. And, we call everyone uncles and aunties. They're not actually related to us, but everyone as a community looks out for these little kids. So I grew up at a time when, I never felt alone. I never felt like in danger. And, to give you an example of, one particular thing that you would never see happen today. As the sun came up, kids get up super early. I have a 5-year-old. He's like in my room, trying to get me out of bed at 6 a.m. And, in Thailand, the rule was that if you woke up before mom and dad, you went down to the at least where I lived, the rule was all the kids would gather outside and we'd run down to the wharf. And it's where we were was right on the South China Sea. So we'd run down to watch the fishermen load their boats. They went out at sunrise right around then, and we would jump on the boats with them. They would go out. They would cast these huge nets behind them, not for catching fish. They already had their fish nets out there they were going to get. These nets were for us kids because these boats would go out, sort of in parallel, very slowly, 5 miles an hour. And we would jump from like boat to boat, rigging to rigging. And if we fell overboard, we would, fall, and then the boat would go past us and we would grab that net and climb back on. And it was just assumed that you knew how to swim or you'd learn really quick. And all the sailors would be watching out for you, but they weren't really sailors; they were fishermen. But it was a whole, and you came back, and they always sent you home with a fish that you could cook with your family, and it wasn't. It just was, it's just very different.
Yeah, like, I mean, if someone threw me in the water like that, I'd be like, put me back up.
Oh, no. I mean, like, we would throw in the water. We're saying, like, the kids, we would play tag by jumping from boat to boat. But if you missed, like, something and you fell in the water, the fishermen had put out nets that you could grab so you could climb back up.
Okay.
So, I mean, but just the idea that there was this expectation that you could take care of yourself, that was pretty cool and different.
Yeah, and I think maybe just from hearing that, I think that's why you've always been that very self-resilient type person. I mean, like, for example, when you were 9, your father took you, to a martial arts exhibition, and you said that kind of changed your life forever because you spent the next, 40 years, mastering weapons and grappling and hand-to-hand. Like, how is that experience like? Because like martial arts is no joke. I mean, you gotta be on top of your game when it comes to that type of discipline.
I mean, it was I think the question I'm going to try and answer is, what was it like sort of in that realm of training? And so here's the funny thing, right? My dad took me to that exhibition because I had, as a person of color also, when I had come to the United States, my parents had moved from Bangkok, Thailand to, of all places, check this out, Madison, Wisconsin. And in Madison, I had never seen snow. I didn't understand that things could be cold. I thought Americans were the greatest warriors in the world because they all had blades on their feet.
Right.
And then I found out, oh, those are ice skates. They're not fighting. And so, I mean, I had no idea of any of this stuff. But I was used to Muay Thai and looking at these Bangkok fighters fighting with no gloves and no pads and stuff. So, anyways, then that was sort of a stopping point for us. But then my dad had a choice. He's a doctor, and he was going to be teaching at the medical school either on the East Coast at GW or on the West Coast at University of Santa Barbara. Why he didn't choose University of Santa Barbara never made any sense to me. But you know what? I have an answer to that question in just a second. But at that time, he chose George Washington University, and so we came to the D.C. area, actually to Northern Virginia, to Fairfax, Falls Church. And you have to remember that Virginia was one of the last states to desegregate schools. And I was part of the first sort of classes that were now being integrated. Wow. And so there was a lot of, fighting going on between white kids and, every other kind of kid, right? And, a lot of the stuff I hear today, in politics reminds me in a bad way of those times. And also at the same time that was happening, we were going through an Iranian oil crisis. So, and people aren't that discerning when it comes to Indian versus Iranian versus Muslim. They're all the same. They're all, whatever derogatory term they want to use. So, I was getting my butt kicked all the time. And finally my mom, of course, was like, turn the other cheek. And, like Gandhi, that is not going to work, right? But my dad was like, screw that. We're going to go get you some training. And he had, seen these black belts training in the back, of the hospital in the place where they had the loading zone. And so he walked down there and said, hey, my son, he explained the situation. He's like, can someone train him? And the black belt there, his name was Butch Hampton. He said to my dad, Doc, there's a exhibition going on tonight. I want you to bring your son, and then we'll talk to the grandmaster. And if he says yes, we'll train him. But we don't take kids. But come anyways. I'll speak up for you. So I guess Butch had told my grandmaster, my instructor, that this kid was facing a lot of racism, and he was fighting all the time, and he didn't want to. And anyways, long story short, I ended up joining this school. I was the only kid. I was 10 at the time, or 9 at the time, and everyone else, the next oldest kid was 18, right? And then they're all in their 18s to 20s. So I just grew up fighting these big adults. To me, they all were adults, right?
Oh,
What's so funny is it was hard. You're right. It's really, really, really hard. Like people think, it's some kind of magic, five-finger death punch touch that's going to work, but it's not. It's just doing something repetitively so many times that it becomes a reflex. And now they say 10,000 hours is, I think, Glick or Malcolm Glick or something says 10,000 hours is mastery. Gladwell. And I have had, I think, estimated 49,300 hours of training.
wow.
So I mean, I have I've trained a lot. And just really quick, the answer to why my dad didn't go to the University of Santa Barbara, he opened this photo album up, and he said to me, and then he just started flipping through the pages. This is when I was finally old enough to be a man and ask him why, so I was out of college, and he starts flipping these pages, and it's my dad next to it's all super hot Thai women on the beach that he was teaching, right? That he was teaching in the med school and stuff. And all of them, it's just him and like 15, 20 women, all of them, all the time, on the beach, all of them on the beach, all on the beach. And I go, holy crap. He goes, look, I grew up in the South China Sea in a tropical island that was beautiful. Why would I want that when I came to the United States? I had already had enough of that. Santa Barbara wasn't a pull for me. I just spent all my time in tropics. I wanted snow. I wanted to see seasons. I wanted to see – that made total sense all of a sudden. I was like, oh, okay. That makes total sense. So.
See, I would be the opposite because
Totally.
it's like, when you see snow the first time, you're like, oh, okay, that's all right. But then when
Yeah.
snow becomes like a blizzard and when it like, just devastates shuts the entire area down, you can't leave your house. I like to see some palm trees.
I 100% agree with you. 100% I agree with you.
And I really love the fact that with your debut fantasy series, Mythborn, Fate of Sovereign, you combined everything like from your from the Dungeons and Dragons. You have the that sense of role playing type elements in there, but then you also have this sense of it really kind of reminded me of a game that I played a while back called Xenogears,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of concept of understanding the gods and the goddesses and and loyalty and things like that and questioning if you can trust the people around you, like how like I just love the fact that this that series kind of really represents that. Like, what was that point to you that you said to yourself, like, hey, you know what, I want to do this, I want to make this book series, and I want to have something out there that people can relate with?
That's a great question because it actually hits a bunch of different things when it comes to my career. And I need to go back a little bit to explain it because people need to know that,
Sure.
I'm a video game designer and I've done about 85, 90 titles. My titles have generated well over $1 billion in revenue for many other people.
Well, let them know. Let them know what series you've worked on.
Yeah,
You
so
have
I,
Elder
I
Scrolls
designed,
and all
yep,
that.
I designed the original Elder Scrolls. I worked for Bethesda Softworks when they first started. There was 6 of us in a townhouse. I did all their titles from 1990 to 94. I basically, launched the Elder Scrolls series and wrote the entire backstory to that world. I also did the Terminator series. I did Wayne Gretzky hockey. I did NCAA Road to the Final Four, and then I, moved on in my career. I went to Looking Glass, where I got to work on Thief the Dark project, which at that time when we were developing it was called Dark Camelot. I got to work on Flight Unlimited and British Open Golf, and then I went to Universal Studios and I worked on Spyro and Crash and The Mummy, and then Lord of the Rings Online and D&D Online, and ultimately I sort of rose through the ranks. And so Mythborn, my series, is accumulation of writing that I started when I was taking my first job at the Department of Energy, just writing a little paragraph that started, 10, 30 years ago, right? And then, or 20 years ago. And then, after this whole career kind of did really, well for me, I took some time off. I had gone to India with my parents, and had my PC with me and my laptop, and I was looking through some old files, and I found that paragraph I'd written from like 20 years ago. And during that time, I'd been writing all this stuff about a world I wanted to build, but none of it all came under one name called Mythborn. And all of a sudden, it sort of clicked for me, and the clicking for me was this moment. So I am a very curious person. I study a lot of different things. Specifically, though, I am very curious in the commonality of myths between cultures. So the Noah's Ark myth is reflected in Sumerian, in Indian, in Iranian mythos. It's all the same story. It's in Thai myths. They all talk about a deluge that, hit the world, and this one guy is sort of, or one family is designated to be the survivor, and, they gather everyone and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, how is that, first of all, possible? Then I started seeing these really true sort of, and by the way, this will lead somewhere cool, just trust me, right? So I started seeing these cool evidence that there was a giant comet impact around 12,500 years ago on the Laurentian ice cap that's right above North America in Canada, and towards the North Pole, and it looked like the comet had hit, broken in sort of 5 pieces, and hit along there, and then in the Chesapeake Bay area, and then down in Turkey. And that kind of impact would have released so much water that the world water heights would have gone up by meters, 40, 50 meters, right? And that's a huge amount of water to come up. And you then see evidence in the northern Badlands, the Scarlands of North America, all this stuff that when you see it from the air, it looks like mud that just flowed down. And then at the same time, you have evidence of a complete extinction of megaflora from North America. All mammoths and saber-toothed tigers, all these things died. So what happened to them? They didn't die everywhere. They just died here in North America. And you see the end of the Clovis people. Anyways, so this all led me to believe, well, what if the myths of our world today, when you hear of Ajna, Apollo, when you hear of Gilgamesh, when you hear of all these different myths, what if they are based on the truth? But what if that truth is so ancient that every culture has their version with their own heroes and their own names, but they come from one single truth, which is this world had a culture long before history that we know began, and that culture and what's left of it, it's the memories of those people and what they went through is what we carry forward today. And so Mythborn actually is a science fiction novel. It starts off, you think it's fantasy, right, but then you start to realize, hey, the magic in here isn't magic, it's nanotechnology. The world here, Eden, the world's name is Eden, it's actually the result of a crashed terraforming ship. And that terraforming ship tried to remap the missing files it was missing from the colonists' dreams by creating what it saw. It saw myths. So it created dragons and elves and, gods and hydras and all these things. And then you had this world sort of progress, and eventually this world, as the nanites died out, as the world sort of gets remade and becomes more mundane, those myths fade, and we might see this world today. So Mythborn is just a fictional history of what might have happened before Earth was here for us. But, that's sort of a big sort of twist in the story, and people have loved it so far. It's been really cool to be able to borrow from all these myths, and everyone's like, well, why do you name all your characters like Apollo and Indra and things like that? And I go, because that's just copying, our legends today. I go, no. The legends today are copying me and my book because I'm talking about a time before these legends. That's what's cool.
Yeah, and that's why I like, because it has that, because I completely understand why A lot of people have compared Mythborn to Lord of the Rings in a way, because you have a lot of that. I would say the predecessor to the history, like you were talking about, like, that Samarillion,
Hmm.
like feelings. Because sometimes when you're writing a story, and that's why I like about the series is you gotta lay down that foundation,
Hmm.
and you have to make sure that you do a really good job with explaining the history, because if you don't do that, and that's something that I enjoy when I read a book, is if I can tell that the author has spent that time, really laying down that foundation, and then that's how you kind of build a better relationship too with some of the characters. If you understand the background, you understand where they come from, and then the relationships that they have. So I
Yeah.
can see why people really appreciate the series.
One of the things that's amazing, and I mean, before even a single word of Mythborn was written, there was over 500,000 words of history, backstory, and world building done about Mythborn before I ever started writing the books, and that took 20 years. And then I started writing the actual books, and people ask me how long does it take to write the books, and I go, well, the actual book, the first one took me about 11 months, maybe 12 months, but I'm not counting the 20 years of thinking, and
Right.
writing and thinking and writing. So, that definitely is an investment I made before I started writing the actual series.
Right. So let's transition to the business side of things, because that's one thing that, for me, I've kind of realized is that you can have the talent and you can have the personality and the drive, and those are all the things that you need to persevere. But then the other half of that equation is that business side. Like, what do you feel right now? I'll kind of split this up. Um, what do you feel is the current state, I would say, for this particular genre, for, like, that science fiction and that kind of fantasy? Because it grow it comes in droves. You have your hot your Harry Potter, and then you had your Twilight, and then you had your Lord of the Rings, and then for a while it kind of gets quiet until something else picks up. So how has how, maybe for you, how has that state been for you?
It's a really great question. I think you're right. I mean, there are cycles, and what I'm realizing now is we are in the what I call the Game of Thrones cycle, right? It is
Right.
a world where it would be called or thought of as fantasy, but all of a sudden people are dying, and there's politics and Machiavellian backstabbing and really awful, evil people, and also really good people, and also people right in between that are those shades of gray. And I think in the old days of Tolkien, I did my college thesis on J.R. Tolkien versus C.S. Lewis, and when you read sort of like what was going on in fantasy at the time, there was this desire, because J.R. Tolkien is a contemporary of World War II. Remember, yeah, or World War One. I can't remember now which one, but he has this very distinct image of seeing men's boots in the back of a truck, sort of rocking back and forth, and he didn't realize that they were dead men until a few minutes had passed. So there's a conscious effort on these people's parts to draw a world together that was better than the world they were in. It wasn't a world of muck and blood and mud. It was a world of elves and light and goodness, and where hearts could be true. And now you see a difference. What you see is this, I think, this sort of uh, ability for freedom in our lives and taking off the shackles of what might be considered, this is what you're intended to do, has also brought with this sort of reluctant realization that all things don't end great, that the story doesn't always have a great ending, and that not everyone you meet means you well. And our fantasy is starting to reflect that. It's starting to reflect realistic people that you meet who may have ulterior motives. I think that fantasy and science fiction are great bookmarkers, or I should say, good lenses by which you can see what society is going through. And for me, I started Mythborn so long ago, and my goal was to write something about the hero in between. See, in my life, and even in Tolkien, and nothing I've, all the things I've 3,000, fantasy books at this point, science fiction books, but I never have met a person who's all good or all bad in real life. I've never met like a saint. I've never met a truly evil person. I know that they probably exist. I get it. But in general, every one of us, our lives are different. They are about meeting those people that are in between good and bad. They are sometimes self-centered. Certainly they're self-interested. And so the way we rate people being good or bad is based on whether or not their desires coincide and either promote or don't promote our desires. So if a person, you and he are both looking, for a job and she's, there for the interview, she is the enemy because she might take your job from you, right? She may not be a bad person, but she's your opponent.
Right.
And, and I think in the same way, that's how we measure people. Well, I wanted to write that book. I want to write a book where the hero isn't the hero and the villain isn't the villain. The villain is the villain from another person's perspective. But that, I wanted all my characters to have an actual reason for doing what they're doing. It doesn't make sense to me to have a guy in a pointy black hat sitting in a tower looking at, thousands of orcs and cackling because he just wants to ruin everything and then zapping and killing anyone who comes up to him with bad news. That's so weird. It's like you couldn't sustain that kind of leadership. No one would follow you. So clearly, what I wanted to do was write a book about this kid who is an assassin in training, which is not a good thing, right? But he's in training and he finds out that his master has been ordered to kill him in the next 8 days. And he has to figure out how to live. So you have this sort of born identity kind of feel to it. But then as it progresses, you realize he's actually part of a much bigger thing happening. And he's an integral part to that thing happening where some people think by his death, the world is saved. And other people think by his death, by his life, the world is saved. And do you sacrifice someone, if you think by one person dying, 10 million people live. Think of that episode. It always got me on 24 where that FBI agent, the terrorist says, hey, if you don't kill this guy by this time, we're going to, detonate a bomb with the virus on it in the middle of the city. And Jack Bauer ends up killing him at the railroad tracks, like shooting him because the terrorist demanded that he kill him. And I just thought to myself, can you actually do that? If you're in the FBI, will they kill you if it means saving 15,000 people over there? I'm actually scared to say I think they will.
Yeah, that's
right?
Something I wonder too. I'm like, maybe I don't want to know.
I think they will. I think they will kill you.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just so I wanted to capture that like sense of what do you do when even the people you trust are going, hey, what we're doing is a bigger good than you being alive. What do you do? Because it's not like they don't feel bad about it. They don't want to kill you, but they think by killing you, they save millions of people. What do you do? That's what I wanted to write. And what I did was try and build characters out that, you really start to identify with because they're not people who have these motivations that are all lofty and just sort of, not in touch with reality. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a question that I really wanted to really ask you because, like I said a little bit earlier, myself as a person of color and, wanting to be part of, let's say, the entertainment industry or whether it may be the gaming industry. And I know for me growing up, I didn't really have a lot of people of color to look up to, for game, game role models. Like I could think of Barrett in like Final Fantasy VII,
right.
or Eddie Gordo, you know what I mean, in Tekken.
Right.
And these were like the framework. Or if I would watch pro wrestling, I would look like Booker T and like,
right.
They all kind of had this similar commonality. So my question to you is, the first thing I want to look at is like, what do you think is the current state of the cultural integration, in the industry? Because it's like ever so often I'll see you or I'll see someone else that's a person of color, and I have to think in the back of my mind like this person must have gone through a lot of trials and tribulations in order to get in a higher ranking position, to be an executive producer, or in your case, executive producer, lead designer, and having all of these hats, which is something that we don't always see in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, could you give me the question again? I think I
Right.
lost it somewhere in the middle there.
Sure. So my question is, how do you, as a person of color, how do you integrate yourself into an industry that doesn't always have people who look like you?
Yeah. So, I will tell you that there are two things I would tell you. One is the games industry, even when I started, was one that I think celebrated diversity. They don't have it in the characters as often. I mean, if I think a little off the top of my head, I remember like Enter the Matrix, Resident Evil. I think it was 5, Left 4 Dead, Assassin's Creed Liberation. Like these had some black characters or people of color as part of the main character or part of the main character's party or the main character itself. But in general, the reason why you didn't see as much in the 80s, 90s and early 2000s is because the world itself wasn't really inclusive, and ultimately if you want to sell the games you had to sell them to the market that was buying them. And it's like asking, why aren't there a bunch of racially diverse Barbie dolls? Well, there are now, right? But there's a long time she was blonde.
Right.
And that's just the way it was, right? But I was going to say that, but I think at least when I came in, nobody gave me heat because of the color of my skin, and here's the honest truth. It's the good part and then the bad part. No one gave me heat because of my color, because ultimately every geek, every nerd, every blurred, every person out there who is interested in doing video games, you're measured on one thing, and that's your geekdom, your nerdom, your blurredcom. How do you know your shit, right? How do you know that background? How well do you know the content? And if you can wrap off, what issue of what comic is this and that and this, dude, no one cares, right? They want people who know and love what they're doing. So that's the positive. I will tell you where the games industry has fallen horribly behind, and it's not their fault necessarily, and that is in gender equality.
Absolutely.
So, ultimately, and I did, after my stint in games, I spent about 4 years raising money for educational games. I raised about $15 million, and I really worked hard in trying to create experiential learning simulations that allowed kids to try something and fail for little cost, because that's the key to learning, is trying and not being penalized for failing, right? Now, what we found when we did a lot of research was there are so many subtle body cues and language used on 6th through 8th grade girls. That's the transition point, and it's used on them to avoid science and math. And if you do like science and math as a girl, you're somehow a nerd and ugly and weird and blah, blah, blah. And it's perpetuated by the teachers in a lot of ways, not just male teachers. Like they focus on giving them, skills that are like home skills or soft skills. And the hard science skills, I feel, are under promoted to girls in school. Now, how does that translate? Well, these girls don't get as much encouragement when they're interested in science and when they're interested in math. And guess what? The boys get a ton of that. And those boys who are good in those classes are usually also, there's a great correlation between their science love and their math love and their nerdness, right? And their willingness to be in the comic book space and to be playing video games. So these girls don't have peers who have their value system set up of, hey, let's go play D&D, or let's go do this, let's go do that. They don't do that, right? They get a different value streak. So, my mom said, birds of a feather, right? You flock together. Well, if you don't have girls encouraged to flock with boys in math and science, how are they going to like the stuff, after they get older? Like you gotta do it in that 6th through 8th grade realm. So I think there's a lot of work we can do to be gender, more gender neutral. One thing, and just one thing that I love about Mythborn, and I wish I should say I did this not with purpose, but I grew up like this, so I couldn't help but write it this way. My books are incredibly different in fantasy because they have taken women out of chainmail bikinis and put them into lead roles, driving the plot forward, where they are badasses and they're killing it, right? And my books passed this thing called the Bechdel test, where for movies in Hollywood, they'll ask, do two women who have names speak to each other and not about a man? And it's amazing that 80% of like Hollywood movies fail that test, right? They have another test that says it's called the sexy lampshade test. It's like if you can take your movie script and replace the main female in the movie with a sexy lampshade and none of the plot changes, it doesn't have to change, you failed the gender equality test, right? So, my books don't. My main character, the main antagonist, is a woman. She's awesome. Her name is Lilith. And, at first you think she's just this demon queen trying to take everyone over and possess them. But as you start to understand what's going on, you realize her people, the Eris, have been enslaved by humans and used to power their magic. And humans don't even know they're doing it, but they do it all the time. And she's trying to gain freedom for her people. And she'll do anything to do that. She's incredibly smart. She's ruthless. I have a princess in here, Yateji, who everyone loves because I think I saw a comment on Facebook where someone said, I picked this book up because I figured, hey, I expected the adventurous young prince who's learning his ropes, the damsels in distress, the sagely dragons, and the knights of renown. He goes, and imagine when I got reading it, and it's actually the dragons are assholes. The knights are wicked. The princess is a sword swashbuckling, assassin in training who kicks butt, and she saves the prince. Then that's great. I mean, I love that I could turn things over like that, and I hope, as creators start doing things, we do put people of color and people of the feminine gender into roles where they are awesome, and not because they're a woman and not because they're a man, but because they're a great character. I mean, my women are strong and smart, but they're also dumb and stupid. It doesn't matter that they're a woman. They are the character. And some of the characters are smart, and some are stupid, and some are risky, and some aren't. But it has nothing to do with gender. And I think everyone should try doing that sometime. It makes them a lot more interesting to read about.
Yeah, like that's just what's important to me is that, sometimes entertainment reflects society. So I just feel that in certain aspects, if there are people like yourself, people like myself and many others that are out there that are helping to push that type of inclusion, then, who knows, like 10 years from now, you may go into, maybe maybe a digital, bookstore. And I also think the reason why, and this is just me from, taking a look at your career and everything else, social media has played a very vital role of exposing even, beyond cultural integration and kind of pushing forward into, gender inclusion. Because now people are able to voice those opinions when necessarily there used to be, and there still is, in my view, certain key holders that kind of, make the, kind of help with the trends. But now, and that's where there's that conflict sometimes is, you have people who have that independent thinking and that freedom of thought versus the people who want more of the constructive system. And that's why I like sci-fi and I like what you're doing, is because I appreciate seeing women and seeing men in those type of versatility of roles. I mean, I've read hundreds of books and I have not seen that type, very rarely have I seen that type of integration, and I just think it's important because then that kind of breaks down all those barriers like we were talking about earlier, that often sometimes causes people to lose confidence, because we got a lot of young people out here who want to write their own books, and they don't. I know for me, I got discouraged because I had a teacher who told me that, me liking fantasy things were ridiculous. You know, so I really value and appreciate what you do, because it always takes, for me, I always say it takes one person.
Right.
It just takes one to either encourage you or defeat you. And the fact that you have allowed yourself to not be defeated is highly commendable, especially at a time like right now where negativity seems to be rewarded more than positivity.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. Hey, I have actually a funny story that speaks directly to this, right? With my start out, right? So when I was a kid, I was told every day I'm going to be a doctor. That's what my goal, that's what my life was mapped out to be. And so I had been studying to be a doctor my whole life. Like in high school, I did stuff like the American Heart Association stuff. And, in college, I was pre-med and everything. So anyways, I graduate and I'm on my way to med school. And that summer, I had been working my senior year, and I'd worked in the Department of Energy. It was incredibly boring, and so I would read these gaming magazines, and I saw this magazine. I'm sorry, I forgot one part. So when I was growing up, from the time I was 10 through high school, I played D&D and Champions and Traveler all the time, every day. In summertime, it was literally all day for the entire 3 months or 2 months of summer. And my mom used to get so mad at me, telling me, you should be taking jobs where you're learning science. This is a waste of your effort. You'll never, this will never lead anywhere. You need to really focus on stuff. Stop playing D&D. Stop playing. And I would never listen. I would just keep playing with my friends. I had a buddy up the street, and he and I would play D&D and Champions and Traveler. Especially Traveler.
Traveler, that's a good game.
Yeah, and it got to a point where I could quote pages, right, of what was on each page. So fast forward, I used to read these gaming magazines, and the gaming magazine, I saw an ad for a game called Wayne Gretzky Hockey, and it was done by a company called Bethesda Softworks. Well, I was in Bethesda, and I was like, Bethesda's not a name you just come up with randomly. So they must be here somewhere. So I started looking for them, and sure enough, I found a small studio in Rockville. So I sent my resume in, right, saying, "Hey, I want to be a game designer. Would you guys consider taking me for the summer, like an internship or something like that?" Never heard from them. I graduate. I have a year before medical school. I get a summer job at the American Banking Association. I'm literally put in this because they offered to pay for my CNE so I could get a certified network engineer. And I figured, hey, I should probably know this computer thing because it's getting to be pretty popular. And even as a doctor, I could use it. So they put me in this my first day at work, they put me in a lab in the basement of this building with all these servers. And it's freezing, right? And then my phone rings, and there's this guy on the phone. He goes, "Hey, my name is Julian." And he's like, Julian is now if you Google Julian LeFay or Julian Jensen, he's one of the top 20 programmers in the gaming industry from that time, right? Not now, but back then. And so he's like, yeah, he sounds like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I can't do it right, but he's like, yeah. So I saw your resume. Do you want to come in for an interview? And I go, okay, yeah, sure, yeah, absolutely. So we meet at a Burger King, and I'm sitting with him, scared out of my mind because I really want this job, right? And he's like, "Hey, I got bad news first. We don't need designer, and you have no credit as designer. Do you know what a producer does?" And he's like, "Do you know what a producer does?" I'm like, yes. I had no idea what a producer does. I was like, okay. He goes, okay. He goes, well, we need a producer to help us get this one game out, blah, blah, blah. But he already looked like he was losing interest, right? And I was like, well, what other games are you guys working on? Well, guess what? The game he's having the most trouble with that he needs someone to help him is Traveler. And when I start quoting rules to him without any sheets in front of me and we start geeking out on it, I was hired the next day.
Wow.
And I called my mom and I was like, it did help me get a job, Mom. So, anyone out there, follow you're right. Don't be discouraged by one person or two people or 10 people. Just, do what you want to do because life is too short to focus on like trying to make money. Focus on what you love. Everything else will come the way you want it.
Yeah, like that. Man, that's incredible. Like, I mean, like you're sitting down with them and you're just like, that's like unheard of. So, I mean, it happens, but like to actually geek out and like meet the person, right?
Right. And we're still friends now.
Wow.
Still 30 years later, we're still friends. And we did Elder Scrolls together. We did Terminator together. We did, he is an awesome programmer, like an awesome programmer, right? And a nice guy, great mentor, great teacher. He taught me everything I knew about how to build games. And, just a really great guy. And I think, ultimately I never would have gotten that job if I could literally tell him what was on every page of the monster manual in D&D, and I could tell him how you go about with your career classifications in Traveler. Remember how you roll dice to move up in your career? Yeah, so, I was naming every single kind of permutation of that. He was like, well, and because Bethesda had the Traveler 2000 license, so that's why they needed somebody. So I literally got hired, and then as soon as we finished the game I was on to help him, NCAA Road to the Final Four, they were like, hey, we lost a Traveler license, but do you want to be the designer on Terminator? And I was like, yeah.
Who wouldn't, right? No, Terminator is too much for me.
Dude, they actually came in to me and they're like, hey, we got this small license. It's a movie no one's heard of. And it's true. It was a tiny.
That's
and
true.
then by Carolco, and they were like, yeah, it's Arnold Schwarzenegger and Terminator. Do you want to work on it? I was like, yeah. And then, dude, that's like that game I did, Terminator 2029, got like a 93 in PC Gamer.
Wow.
And my career was set after that.
Man, now I'm curious, and I'm sure many people, that enjoy games as much as I do, and kind of learning about the different positions in the business. What's something that maybe people would not expect, like if you are, let's say, producing or designing?
Yeah, you know what? So first, I will give you a good answer, but a great answer. I've actually answered this question on Quora. So if you go to Quora,
I love Quora.
And just search for my name. There's a bunch of questions. I've been named the top writer on Quora 2017, so you can find the answer to this question. I gave a much longer rendition. But essentially, most people, first of all, don't realize how games are even made. The fact is, it's not a bunch of guys geeking out. It is, but not full time, right? It is some geeking out, but really, games are about trying to take complex ideas and fit them not just into a storyline, but a storyline that allows you to let the player have agency. And agency is really important because if you think about what it's like to watch a movie and writing a movie script, the audience, they have very little control over the outcome of the movie. You can control their emotions to some extent, and you can make them excited about a scene or not a scene. But in a game, a player can choose not to go through a door or to pick up a different thing, and you have to let them do things that give the feeling of choice. Otherwise, they're just on a rail, right? And there's no feeling of power and control, and that's agency. And so one of the most interesting things for me that I learned is the sheer amount of planning that goes into games production. So that's what a producer does. A producer is a person in games, a producer in movies, a producer is a person who raises money and things like that. And the director is a person who sort of plans out the movie. It's the other way. Well, it's not the other way around, but in games, the producer is the day-to-day. He's the one looking at the schedule, resources, budget. He's making sure that everything is planned out correctly on a schedule. The designer, I was surprised that although I did a lot of writing, designer's job, you really need to understand statistics. The fact is that if you want to be a great game designer, you need to understand how frequently something might happen, and how to create a system whereby the actions you want to have happen will happen at a consistent rate, right? They don't seem, random number generation, RNG, right? You don't want to have a RND all the time, right? Or RNG all the time. You want to come up with, statistical ways in which to create a system that the outcomes are predictable by the player and influenceable by the inventory. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
Yeah. And so ultimately that was surprising. Also just the sheer amount of people it takes to make a game. When I did Lord of the Rings online, I think my team was about 150 people.
Jeez.
And the budget was well over $40 million to build that game. And in fact, when we were at Universal, the other MMO being done was Worlds of Warcraft with us. And so the guys at Blizzard, I know them well, they kick butt. And they, their budget was like 60 million. There was a lot of money in games. I don't think people realize that the games industry is, something like 13 times bigger than the movie industry, in terms of sheer dollars. I also don't think people realize that you look at like Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol or Ghost Recon, that made $1 billion in the first year, in box office sales. And then you look at like Call of Duty or something, and it got $1 billion in the first 3 days.
Yeah.
So, it's like there's just a totally different level. And now the games industry, you really need to understand your area of expertise, and whether it's coding, art, design, or management. These are areas in which there are people who are incredibly serious, incredibly brilliant, and you can't fake it. That unlike, I've seen other career industries where people can sort of phone it in and coast. The games industry is a lot of people just like you, if you get a job there, who are just as smart as you and who have a love and passion for what they're doing. And if you don't do your part, you're letting everyone else on the team down. So you really, really need to focus on your quality and your timeliness and your ability to estimate what you can do and your honesty, because ultimately no one should get fired for being late with something, but everyone should get fired if they lie about it.
Yeah, that's very man. I never thought. Well, see, I would think statistics. I could see that. Because you got to be, because coding and all that, it's very systematic. You got to be good with numbers. So that's really interesting.
But what's interesting also is rarely do they actually use your statistics. The reason why you need to be good at statistics is because if you can't take a creative idea, like I want to take an astronaut and make a game where I jump from Earth to asteroids to the moon, if I can't explain it using statistics and simple algebra, then no programmer will listen to you to then take it and make it into real code math where, they might be using calculus or trigonometry, whatever they use, right?
Right.
But what they want to know first, actually explain what you're trying to get done, Okay. And if you can't do it in a simple mathematical way, no problem. Go and think about it some more.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, my final question for you. So, what advice would you give to someone like me, someone like other people who are, coming into this business? Because this is not always a business where people are nice to each other. Sometimes it can be very dog eat dog, and, people will be nice to each other for their benefit. And once they come up, that's it. You don't necessarily, hear from them.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's a great question. And I probably would have answered it differently at different stages in my career. But at this point, the honest truth is this: you can never fake talent. So I think ultimately, you should do your homework about, if you want to be an artist or a game designer or a programmer or a producer, you should research those job needs and qualities, and you should work on improving your capabilities there, whether that's through classes or through training or through finding someone to help mentor you. But I will tell you that the secret I think to success in almost anything, and that is I think you have to help others without any expectation of getting anything back. Every time you help somebody, you create a network of people who are inclined favorably towards your success. And it's not about expecting them to help you, but when you give selflessly, when you try to truly help people because you just want to help or you might be in a position to help, believe me, every time that I have come into a hurdle or I disagree with you. I don't have necessarily resilience 24/7. There are times when I just wanted to quit. There are times when I was like, why didn't I finish medical school? Like there are times when I, literally have called my mom or dad and been like, I want to go. I want to go. The point is because it's hard. It's hard to keep going, and it's hard to keep going when you're by yourself. But when you sow good karma by helping people selflessly, then what ends up happening is sometime when you need it most, someone's in a position to give you that good word or to help you with a good thought or to open a door to a job you didn't think was available or to make a connection, introduce you to someone else so that the way you help them, maybe that other person they know can help you. And I think the world does reflect good acts in a way back to the user where it is, or the back to the giver in a way that is always unexpected, but is truly both magical and amazing. And I wouldn't be where I am today without the help of the people who have helped me get here. And some of those people I never helped before, but I do believe that they helped me because I had a positive outlook and a positive karma somewhere. And although they may themselves never have been helped by me, somewhere in the great cosmic balance, somebody who was putting, the balancing scale said, well, it's time for VJ to get one good one, right? And the good news is it's so easy to help. My kids ask me like, which one do you love more? And I'm like, I love both you guys. And you can't love both of us more. And I go, why? Is there a finite? Is my love limited? I have unlimited love, so I can love you both equally. And I think it's the same for good acts. There's no limit to how many people you can help. I'm not talking about financially helping everyone. That clearly there are limits to things you can do and can't do. But I truly believe that the secret to doing good for yourself in the world is to actually approach the world and give what it is that you would like to get, right? And I think that we all want to have fortune smile upon us. So every day we should embody the virtues of fortune and smile upon others. Help them if we can. And I think that's how it comes back to pay you in ways you'll never expect. It's wonderful. It's amazing.
Thank you so much, V, for being on. And like I said many times before, I really thank people, like you that are well-rounded. I mean, I know for me growing up, me and you have very similar backgrounds. My parents came from West Africa, and they came with nothing. And they worked hard day in, day out to make sure that someone like me could see that all options are available. As you said today, if you're willing to put the work into it. And I got clowned for a lot of things like that, like for loving education or liking Dungeons and Dragons or playing Street Fighter or wherever it may be. But it's people like you that help people like me to know that it's okay and that there's no shame with it. There's no shame for paying your dues, working hard, and making things happen for yourself, which thus manifests to other people, like you were saying, having that sense of of good karma. It is so, I tell people that all the time. I'm like, if you see successful people, it's not necessarily the talent. Yeah, that's only one component. But
That's
when
right.
you are willing to help people with no return, that's to me how those type of blessings manifest, and I think that's why um, people continue to enjoy what you do, is because you're, to me, you're a realist and you say it like it is, and that's so important to have people like you in this society, especially at a time where voicing your opinion gets seen as sometimes a negative diction, instead of something that could be like, well, maybe we need to have a dialogue, and maybe you have to have a room for, maybe there's a need for conversation, because to me, I think all perspectives are important within our society, and I will always respect what you have done, because so many people, like you said, you want to give up, you want to quit, but you had that sense of passion and that sense of persistence, and to me, that's why I feel you're blessed.
Well,
is
thank
is
you.
be, is because you've done that. Because some people is like, they say they're blessed, that's one thing, but to actually be blessed is you always have that resiliency, and you keep going no matter the odds, no matter what it may be. So you have my utmost respect, and I would definitely love to have you come back as a guest on the program, because you are just so wonderful, and I really
Oh, thank you.
appreciate you taking the time to be on today.
Well, Amira, I really, really appreciate you having me on. Just as in closing, I'll tell you that my father told me that I will be amazed how lucky and blessed I am the harder I work. And I think he's right. For people who are interested in learning more about Mythborn or me,
Absolutely.
go to www.mythbornbook.com. I'm sorry, mythbornmedia.com, mythbornmedia, mythbornmedia.com. You can join our fan club if you text Mythborn, Mythborn, to 66866. And if you Google my name, which I'm sure will be in the captions below this podcast, VJ,
Absolutely.
yeah, VJ Lakshman. Or if you Google Mythborn, you'll see it's on Amazon. You can join us on Facebook. I have a YouTube channel called Mythborn Live with an exclamation point, and there's about 30 videos of me there talking about different things from paranormal stuff to mythology to how different parts of these various crazy things influenced Mythborn to writing tools, how we stay creative in the games industry, all that kind of stuff. So I think if you guys are interested in that, but most important, Amira, I really want to thank you for taking the time out today to host me. I know it's a Sunday and it couldn't have been easy for you, and I really appreciate, just taking the time out of your weekend to interview me. If there's any way that I can help you or yours, let me know, and I would be honored to be on your show again. For those people who love books but like to listen, the audio book for Mythborn should be out today or tomorrow, probably tomorrow. So you guys can, maybe once book 4 comes out in a month or two, we can do a recap of the audio book
Absolutely.
and book 4 and all, just compare notes and stuff. But I really thank you so much for hosting me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, anytime. No, one thing about this business, like there is no day off. Okay, like
Yeah.
it's 7 days a week, 24/7. You gotta
Yeah.
be on it, no matter how. That's why I told my audience that a while back, is that you guys have to understand that the people, that when we work in this business, it's you get barely any sleep. Okay, gamers, like people who do JRPGs. I remember reading of a designer who said they had to call the paramedics because he had put in 150 hours of work that week, and
Uh,
he passed out. So, it's a commitment, but it's also a blessing as well.
Well, you know the secret to success, and that's working hard because you're doing it. So, hopefully, people listen to this. I hope everyone's inspired by it. Go read, and if you have a choice of
Yes.
what you're going to read Mythborn.
Yes, please. Like I got it favorited. I told my friends about it. So when that book comes out, I'm gonna read it, review it, have a good
Yeah,
time, come back.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, cool.
All right. Take care.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Bye bye.
All right, bye bye.
And once again, it was such a blessing to be able to talk to V. Lakshman, of course, award winning author and creator of the Mythborn series. For more information on Mythborn, check out mythbornmedia.com. They also have a Twitter, which is at twitter.com/mythbornmedia. And guys, below today's episode, I will have all of the fabulous links so you can get yourself a fabulous and awesome copy or multiple copies, right, of the Mythborn series. You know that I'm definitely going to be reading through the Mythborn series and doing my own interpersonal review on them at a later date. But once again, thank you, V, for coming on, and we'll definitely have to have you come back on because he was absolutely fabulous. Like, guys, let me tell you, I was gagging, okay? I felt so honored because this was, a man that got to, work on a series that I greatly admired. And just once again, I love seeing people like him that are so intellectual and giving back to not only the intellectual, community, the gaming community, and of course the literary community. It's really good to have that type of diversity, have his type of mindset, and I feel so honored once again to be able to talk to him. That hands down one of my favorite people that I've had a chance to talk to. But guys, before we end today's fabulous episode, I have to bring you some smart, intelligent news. And guys, this has been a topic that I've had to let it ferment because I didn't want to just talk out of anger and sound distasteful. Because to me, the mission of SIN, of Smart Intelligent News, is that I want to talk about it intellectually, maybe, bring up an interesting dialogue and really talk about it. And today, guys, we're briefly going to be talking about our fabulous, right, and fine president, President Trump, and the mannerisms, okay? And to me, what I think is his ideology of treating, in my personal opinion here, of treating female reporters, okay? So for me, as a female critic, this was something that I felt I had to talk about, and it really resonated with me. And I really want to kind of maybe help to change the perception of what people think about in regards to the media and women's participation in the media as well. This story, of course, is coming from the WashingtonPost.com. And I love this analysis, okay, in regards to the topic that we are talking about today. So I'm going to read it through one of the brief points here, and then we'll talk, okay? So, it was supposed to be a triumphant Rose Garden news conference for President Trump. The United States, Canada, and Mexico had reached a new trade deal, an update of the decades-old NAFTA, which he has deemed a disaster. Then, as it's been known to happen during Trump's news conferences, things took a turn. He opened the question and answer session by inexplicably deriding a female reporter. Here is Trump calling on ABC News' Celia Vega for the first question of the news conference. And guys, this is the breakdown, okay? So Trump says, she's shocked that I picked her. She's in a state of shock. And Vega responds with, I'm not. Thank you, Mr. President. Trump responds again with, that's okay. I know you're not thinking. You never do. And Vega's, I'm sure Vega, this is just my opinion. Like, I'm sure Vega's like, okay. But she says, I'm sorry. And Trump says, no, go ahead. It seems likely Trump heard her say, I'm not thinking, instead of thank you, hence his reply. And a transcript the White House produced of the event initially quoted Trump as responding, I know you're not thanking, you never do. They later sent a corrected version of the transcript that said, thinking. There are two things about this exchange that were disturbing, although not out of character for Trump. First, his attack on Vega came out of the blue. Vega hadn't yet asked a question, so Trump can't blame his derision on something she had just asked. Not that would be normal behavior for a president either. Second, the attack came across as gender-driven. When Trump wants to attack women, he often resorts to stereotypes, reducing women to their looks or their intellect, or supposed lack of it in many instances. In summer of 2017, he attacked MSNBC anchor Mika Brzezinski by alleging that she had a facelift. In his very first presidential debate, Trump pushed back on host Megyn Kelly for questioning him about his treatment of women by saying that she had blood coming out of her whenever. He has called NBC News' Katie Tur, Little Katie, and New York Times columnist Maureen Dow as crazy. And I thought this was really interesting. So Rutgers University Kelly Dittmar, this is what she said in regards to Trump. One way he exercises his masculine power is to talk to and about women on the basis of their appearance instead of more substance. And she actually finished a really interesting study. I actually have to read it about the role of gender and how that was played in the, or I would say the portrayal in the presidential campaign. So that was pretty cool. Belittling women in those terms is standard Trump practice, okay? So I will have the link below, guys, if you want to read the rest of the article. But I'm going to say this, okay? As someone that is a social commentator and a female critic, I can really sympathize and relate to what Vega and the rest of these female reporters unfortunately had to deal with, I'm sure, with interviewing Trump. Number one, men, like male reporters should be, of course, given the same respect as their female counterparts, right? And the same thing, you got to say that in reverse too, that female reporters or any woman working in the media deserves the same respect. I think that it was distasteful. I think it was really disrespectful for Donald Trump to really not give respect to this female reporter, because at the end of the day, guys, when it comes to journalism and when it comes to certain forms of media, to me, a true journalist is going to be that person that is going to play devil's advocate. They are going to, maybe question certain opinions or question certain rhetorics, because when it comes to society, and this is just me, I think society is always a better place when you have a diversity of different opinions, so long as it's coming from the facts, okay? Because to me, true journalism is about the facts. It's about synthesizing the information that you get and not only reporting on the facts, but, from time to time, of course, you give your opinion, but they have to be based on that factual information. The fact that we have a president, unfortunately, that does not have regards for minorities is really disheartening, because to me, I feel that the president of the United States, okay, should be someone that should be a hero, should be someone that we should look up to, someone that is humble, and someone that is open-minded to all different perspectives. I think it's really sad that we've had all of this progress, all of this progress through women's rights and, because guys, let me tell you something. I know sometimes the term feminism, it can be seen as negative. It's only focusing on, women's rights. But if you really look at feminism, guys, to me, it is about the balance of gender equality. It is about, if a woman goes to a White House press conference, she should not be subjected to being disrespectfully belittled for just stating a question. And in this case, hadn't even asked a question. I really think that's deplorable. When I think of the President of the United States, I think of someone that is respectful to all people and who wants to make a difference for the betterment of this country. Because right now, this country is falling apart, and I think it's really sad, to kind of tie it back in. I think it's really sad that we've had all this progression of gender equality and women finally having a platform to, to be able to state their voices, to be seen as, role models for this next generation coming up, who want to be reporters or whatever you want to do. So at the end of the day, and I'm just saying this to President Trump here, a reporter is a reporter, and you got to give respect to the reporter, if they are coming to you respectfully to ask a question. If you don't feel comfortable with asking, if someone asks you a question and you don't feel comfortable with it, you don't have to answer it. But I just think that, women are constantly dealing with this. A reporter should not be judged on how they look like. They should be, evaluated based on their writing ability and based on how they are bringing the factual information. At the end of the day, I don't care how a journalist looks like. I care about the content that they're presenting. I'm caring about that journalism should be something that is for the betterment of society, to give those perspectives that sometimes you don't always hear. Sometimes when you're a journalist, you got to play devil's advocate. And I play that all the time. It's not an easy position to be in, but somebody has to do it in order for society to progress in the proper manner. It doesn't mean that, you have to be a disrespectful reporter. It doesn't mean you have to be rude, but you can present things, you can, ask questions without having to be subjected to that. I'm sure many of those reporters are used to Trump shenanigans. And for a party, the Republican Party, a party that talks about, putting women in a better light, this completely dismisses that, in my view, and I'm quite frankly tired and just disappointed that women have to constantly be subjected to this. And I'm not trying to say this because it's like, oh, I think all men are jerks. That's not my ideology, because I know that there are tons of really respectful men out here who really do care about women's rights and the balance of gender equality. But if female reporters cannot even go, to the White House to have Trump belittle them, I mean, that's absolutely deplorable. It's disrespectful, and that is not the manner in which, to me, a president should be acting. But that's just me. You guys let me know what you think about this, because I feel that, female reporters, it's been a tough time for us, and it's like if you don't have a pretty face or if you don't look a certain way, and even if you do, to be fair, even if you do have a pretty face, you're automatically seen as stupid. And that is ridiculous. Like, I should be judged on how I present the facts and how I give my perspective. Because at the end of the day, we're all entitled to our opinion. That is true. But you got to give respect to a human being at the end of the day. You got to give respect, to someone who has spent the time, to be a reporter, guys, is really not easy. And then to be a female reporter, depending, it's even tougher because it's like everything is based on your looks and not on the actual content that you're presenting. And I think that's sad. Or if you're really good looking too, the opposite effect is, people think that you're not smart. And that's ridiculous. Like, journalism is based, to me, on the writing skill, reporting the facts, giving opinions, and giving your perspective if you're a opinion reporter, as an example. But this article from the Washington Post was really well written, and I got to give my definite props and respect to all the female reporters that unfortunately have to put up, with Trump shenanigans, unfortunately, and definitely shout outs are due to Cecilia Vega and the other reporter that was at that news conference that was just subjected to just so much, just deplorable and just so disrespectful. Journalists are there, to get the information and to report it to the public in the way that it needs to be reported. Reporters should not have to be subjected to, belittlement and disrespect. That's not, to me, what the president of the United States should be doing. And that, to me, is the bottom line. But you guys let me know what you think. Of course, you can follow me on twitter.com/SINTVNOW. And guys, like I always say, remember to get smart and stay informed.